here's where I think we might diverge, and where our opinions are different, is that when we talk about this suffering and well-being, again, in the ether, in the general, in the abstract, it fails to account for the challenge of the fact that being is experienced individually. Okay. And the greatest good, you could say, for society might be the well-being, most good for the most people, right? You might say something like that. But that may not be the most good for me. For instance, if I go and, or let's say somebody decides that they can cheat on their wife, and she's not going to be the wiser. Let's say that's just like essentially guaranteed. And therefore your well-being is going to increase. The person you're cheating on, they enjoy themselves, and your wife's none the wiser. And therefore, on that moral calculus, where we're measuring it all by well-being, you've gotten away with it. And therefore, everyone in that equation has a higher level of well-being in that equation. You also could deal, and that's maybe even a little more mundane one. If I know I only have X amount of years left to even exist at all, in other words, my being itself only has 5 years left, well, what if I spend it doing things that are just awful for the world, but boy, oh boy, they're great for me? You know what I mean? Like, the problem is if well-being is the measure of all morality, my well-being is the measure of all morality for me. And so the degree to which I would view an action as good and something that I should do would rationally, in my mind, only depend on me, because I don't experience the well-being of other people. And now, everyone needs to be very careful what I'm saying here. So it's like, pause. I'm not saying that my helping another person doesn't make me feel better. But remember, it's me who's feeling better because I did this good thing. And if an action in no way causes me well-being, or only causes me to suffer more, like, why would I ever sacrifice for the greater good of the group? That's an irrational thing. You could say, well, you have moral sentiments that are, want to see your genes propagate or whatever. So what? Like, I care a lot more about me enjoying my life than I do about my genes, maybe someone distantly related to me, maybe having a better experience and having an extra child or something. It just doesn't seem to, like, I don't see how that, like I said, on the level of the collective, it seems to make sense. But the problem is this: you don't exist as a collective. You exist as an individual.
Right. And I think you're making some very good points there, right? If I'm following you correctly, that you're saying, why would I ever care about anybody else? Why isn't it just about me, right? And my own satisfactions. Is that right?
Yeah, but I would say it this way. The well-being of the group, only rationally speaking, because then I'm trying to get into this atheist mindset, the well-being of the group only matters to me to the degree that it affects me. Like, for instance, let's say that there were people on some planet 80 bajillion light years from here, and me doing something now might benefit them, even though it sucks for me. It might benefit them 100 million years from now. Now, in the moral calculus, that would say, yeah, you're supposed to do that. But I'd be like, what? That makes no sense, because if it doesn't affect me, if my being itself comes to an end in however many years, I need to milk every bit of well-being and get rid of every bit of suffering out of it that I can in these 80 years. The group The group only is relevant to me to the degree that it affects me. Because otherwise, if it doesn't affect me, then why would I care? It's like caring about the suffering of ants. Like, I don't really care if ants suffer, right? It doesn't affect me. So that's why I torch them with a torch if they're biting my horse's legs. You know what I mean? And I don't feel bad for it.
Right.
And so the thing is I just have this trouble drawing this distinction. Again, it comes down, it seems arbitrary to me that we say, well, the most good for the most people without any reference to you. And this is a very pressing question on the nature of rights. See, the Enlightenment said this. It also said that you as the individual have rights, and that the group can't harm you for their well-being for more people, right? And so here's the thing. This is the other thing. I get really scared because if you're going to say that the most good for the most people is the ultimate measure of if something is moral, well, then if that person's existence or that person's whatever it is causing a problem for the collective, well, then they don't have any rights.
Yeah, and I can see where you're going with this. What, at least where I think you're going with this. What I think you're getting at is that people will sacrifice themselves for ideas or ideologies that are not in their own best interest, right? They'll go to war, they'll die for a cause, they'll martyr themselves, right? Because they believe in something. It doesn't necessarily have to be religious, but a lot of times it is, right? And to that, well, that is a case of where culture has shaped somebody's morality into a position where they now see that that's right. So I'm not saying that culture doesn't play a role. I'm saying culture is very important in defining what those notions of morality are, even though they're built on these same basic moral sentiments. So we can evaluate different cultures based on how well they
but again,
help us.
And I want to make sure you got this, because I'm not just saying that there might be people who do things that harm themselves. I'm saying, why would I care about the well-being of the entire group if over my own? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like, if the group can be better off by me suffering immensely, right? Why would I say, okay, I'm going to go suffer immensely? I'm not getting anything out of this. It's just suffering. Then I die. And I see this.
Then you're Jesus, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing. If Jesus had not rose from the dead, that's exactly what that story would be. It would say, you go and experience the ultimate suffering and for nothing, and everyone else goes to hell anyway. And it's like, well, the whole way we measure the morality of Jesus is based on this idea of that there is something that is gained out of it, that suffering can end because of his suffering, right? It was a true sacrifice. But this is what I'm getting at. The problem I have with this moral system that Sam describes and a lot of people describe, based on the well-being of the collective.
Now be careful, because Sam doesn't do that, right? And I'm not doing that either. We're saying that you have to do both. Individual and collective are both considerations.
Well, and
individual is probably the primary.
But why?
Yeah.
Why would the group factor into my equation at all, only to the degree that it affects me? To me, in my mind, this is just the way that I do it. If I were in your shoes and I held these presuppositions, I would reject the well-being of the group. The group is a means to my ends.
Now, you know what? That's very common. I've noticed for religious people to say that, like, if I were removed from my moral framework, and I'm putting words into your mouth, but if I was removed from my moral framework, I would immediately try and get away with all I could, right? I could murder or cheat or whatever.
I'm going to be more careful about that, because this is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I would go out and do those things. Okay. I'm saying that I would do the things that I could get away with, and it would be rational to do so. I'm not saying it on some sort of a twisted, like, oh, I want to go do bad stuff. I'm saying if I were being rationally consistent, if I could increase my well-being by cheating on my wife what is the rational reason not to do it? If I now people would say, well, what if you get caught? I'm saying let's just play with the guarantee that I'm not going to be caught. The moral calculus tells me this is the moral action. And that goes for the group as well. If I could enslave someone and increase my well-being, I don't care about the group. I don't care about the future state of all this and the stability of society long-term. Like, who cares? Its well-being is experienced by me. And so I have a very, I want to approach this from the perspective of I'm putting on my atheist hat and I'm trying to figure out where would I go if I did that. And what's really scary to me is that I would gravitate towards radical individualism and supremacy. Basically, whatever is good for me, everyone becomes a means to my ends. They are not ends in themselves. And that's scary to me. And so talk me out of it. Why is the collective important, even if it doesn't benefit me?
Yeah. So I'm hearing, and I've heard this argument a lot, right? That in fact, Ayn Rand kind of goes down this path. Says the man's moral purpose is the pursuit of his own happiness, right? Mm-hmm. That's her whole, and she's an atheistic philosopher, right? So yeah. There are thought or schools of thought that go down that path, and so I guess it's worth pointing out that there are a lot of different ways you could go with this. Moral philosophy is not just boils down to one or two little things, right? So there is that direction that you could go. As far as the question of why don't I do these things? Why don't I try and get away with all I can? Well,
I would say why shouldn't I do them?
Why shouldn't I? Okay.
Why don't I do them is different. I'm asking why do I have a moral obligation to the group and to humanity generally instead of just to myself? Even if it doesn't benefit me.
Yes, your actions will still have consequences, right? Whether or not you believe in morality or not, whatever you do is going to potentially impact you in some way. So I'm going to agree with you that there's probably not clear rational reasons for why you would or would not pursue your own ends, but there are very likely sentimental or emotional reasons why you wouldn't do that. Use the example of cheating, right? Cheating on your wife or something. You might say, well, I could get away with that and I'll improve my own well-being. But then the question is, but would you really? Or would you?
But so to that, I would
think that through, right?
I would go back to Nietzsche and I would read Nietzsche and I would say, that's my slave morality speaking. That's my Christianity that turned me into this groveling little coward who won't go and sleep with all the women the way the Romans used to do. And be the champion with the master morality that I should have. And I have a very hard time walking away from that argument because it seems to me that the sentiments that I have, the consequences that I'm feeling are because of my socialization. And so I need to use reason to reject these irrational sentiments and embrace what is rational. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, if you want more content, including the podcast, go to thoughtful-faith.com. Thanks for watching.